Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. There were 13 survivors. Some will say that they were unlucky, but they were certainly luckier than those who did not survive the emergency landing on a remote Pacific island. The battered survivors regrouped on the beach. Slowly they began to organize, trying to find shelter, water, and food. The pilot, the oldest of the remaining ones, did not survive. Margaret seemed to naturally take responsibility, checking on people and starting to organize things. It is noteworthy that 4 friends survived: Tom, his wife Helen, Bill, and his wife Mary. They were lucky that they were in the tail. Few survived from the front of the plane. They were a middle-class married couple in their 40s, enjoying a vacation together, traveling to the islands of the Pacific Ocean when they booked a cheap charter for sightseeing. They were in good physical shape and liked to travel on their own, but most of their trips were designed and planned by Tom. He and Helen were well suited to each other. Both were adventurous and energetic. Tom was 7.5 centimeters taller than Helen. His height was 1.73 meters. His physical fitness was supported by endurance sports, cycling and running, but not the gym or swinging. Helen's long curly brown hair was usually styled in a ponytail, and there was a fringe over her beautiful deep brown eyes. She was bright and quick-thinking, but sometimes she could be quite blunt and straightforward. They got along well with the quieter and quieter Bill and Mary. Tom and Bill had been friends all their lives, had known each other since they were 10 years old, when they ran around the streets together, and fortunately their wives got along with them equally well. Bill was fit, played golf, and engaged in activities that did not require much effort. Mary went to the gym and swam with Helen. Her shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes matched her ebullient personality. Both were hugely popular with a wide range of friends. Most of the passengers were a group of rugby players, but only 5 of them survived. Another couple survived the crash. Mike and Kelly were about 20. There was also a seriously injured and unconscious lone woman. The last survivor was Margaret, their leader, a 57-year-old widow and a retired nurse. They were at the farthest point of their tour on an outdated 2-seat turboprop aircraft when a storm suddenly hit. They flew for several hours under strong winds, thunder, and lightning. Tom wondered if anyone else knew about their predicament, and his doubts were heightened when the pilot announced that they were going to make an emergency landing and that everyone needed to get ready. The impact on landing was severe. The small plane was torn in half after it flew past the intended beach and crashed into the water, and then into the reef. The immediate consequences were mass death, injury, and shock. Survival has become a priority. Now, only the back of the plane was visible, dangling precariously on the reef as the survivors reached the shore in rags. There was little of value left on the destroyed plane: some food, clothes, and a first aid kit, which did little to help them survive the first night, as the storm was still raging. The next day was completely quiet and peaceful. During the initial search, they found several shelters made of ship logs that had long been overgrown with jungle. They guessed that the logs were from a 19th century clipper ship. Then they found the skeletons. There were 12 of them, and judging by the position of the bodies and the discarded weapons, they died in battle. This was confirmed when a ship's log was found, in which their exploits and a map of the island were recorded. Fortunately, it contained useful information about the sources of water and food. Apparently, there were wild pigs on the island. It was also confirmed that the island was uninhabited at that time. The survivors of the ship had been alone for almost 3 years, and like themselves had no idea of their whereabouts, as they were blown off course during a storm that lasted several weeks. Over the course of several evenings, Margaret read out their story. More than 20 people survived the first crash, but over time lost more people due to injuries and illnesses. Small disputes were recorded at the end of the magazine, which gave rise to resentment and eventually hatred, aggravated by isolation, fear, and lack of food. "My God," Tom remarked, "it looks like Lord of the Flies." Then he outlined the plot of the book, in which a group of boys, also abandoned on the island, turned on each other with savage cruelty. Partly because of the magazine and some disagreements in their group, they decided to elect a leader and agree on some principles. Margaret was chosen quickly and without any opposition. The principles were more complex, but they settled on the following. Survival is the main goal, including food, water, and shelter. Alarm was chosen as the next priority. Tom suggested collecting all the mirrors and shiny surfaces to signal. He ignored Adam's rugby team captain quip that the tail of an airplane is a more obvious signal. It wasn't worth arguing. The fact that the plane was washed away the next day later confirmed his point of view. They also agreed to maintain signal beacons and work together as a community, sharing everything. All decisions will be made for the benefit of the entire group by the leader, but everyone will have the right to vote on key issues. Bill added another priority, to bury the dead, both recent and skeletons, sadly adding that they now include Amy, a lonely traveler who died peacefully in her sleep without regaining consciousness. Partly to record her demise, Tom began to add their history to the ship's log. Everything started well enough for the group. Housing and water were available, but there was not enough food, and they organized food extraction, hunting, and spearfishing. At first, they were sure that they would be found, but they never saw a single plane. Tom realized that they had been flying for several hours during the storm, and wondered if they had made a flight plan, because the airfield was rudimentary at best, nothing more than a rough grass path. He also wondered how strong the storm was in the region. If everyone was recovering from the cyclone, would they even look for a small random charter flight? He decided to keep this information to himself. As the hope of a quick rescue faded, outbursts of anger appeared. A few weeks later, quarrels began around the women with accusations of flirting. It was mostly between younger husband Mike and members of the rugby team, whom he accused of groping his wife Kelly. Tom noticed that the captain of the Adam team constantly revolves around his wife Helen, and the youngest guy in the Dan team is around Mary. He tried to quietly inform Helen about this so as not to start another argument. She treated his concern rather dismissively. It didn't help that their clothes were getting more and more worn out, exposing quite a lot of bare skin. It came to a fight. Zach, one of the rugby players, hit Kelly's husband Mike, who retaliated in a rage. By the time they were separated, Zach, the rugby player, was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Margaret called for restraint, pointing out that they do not have medical supplies and they will not be able to treat serious injuries. The rugby players were furious over their friend's injury, and discontent between the factions was growing rapidly. It was Adam who explained that they were supposed to be in everything together, but there is one thing that they did not share. The three married guys were furious. It almost came to a new fight. Margaret only managed to calm the situation by telling everyone to leave and cool off. Margaret discussed her problems with each of the wives, subtly asking if any of them wanted to offer comfort to the young guys. Their testosterone was clearly on edge. Helen, as always, was direct and precise. Do you mean, for example, handwork or full-fledged lovemaking? I haven't reached that point yet. We're just exploring all the possibilities. Our husbands will never tolerate this. Mike might give in to Kelly. He didn't want to hurt Zach at all. Opinions were divided and no decision was made. Try mentioning this to your husbands. See what they say. Expect them to be against it. But read between the answers. See if there is a hidden recognition in them of how precarious our position is. The discussions that followed did not lead to anything other than an increase in tension. They discussed the issue again at a meeting with everyone. Adam demanded a vote due to the importance of the issue and the current impasse. Margaret agreed, but only to see how things were going. All women had a choice in this matter. 4 young men voted for the separation of amenities, as it was worded, and 3 husbands voted against. Mary and Kelly also voted against it. It's almost settled, Tom thought, but was completely stunned when Helen voted yes. He looked at her in complete disbelief. Since Zach couldn't vote, despite Adam's statement that he would vote yes, the deciding vote now belonged to Margaret. Margaret noticed the tension and insisted that everyone think about their voices, as nothing would happen for several days. I would encourage you all to discuss the possible consequences. Our continued survival depends on it. Helen was trying to explain her voice to Tom. This is serious. We are already fighting and it can only escalate. Zach may not survive, which you think will happen if he dies. Compared to that, a little affair is nothing. This is ridiculous. They are half your age. It will cause even more quarrels and resentments, and you seem to be too involved. Look around, Tom. There's no one their age here except Kelly, and she's already having to deal with everyone fighting over her. It's natural that they need female company. At their age, they should be dating, and they haven't been on a date for months. We are abandoned and trying to survive. In this situation, social norms do not apply. Who knows when or even if we get off this island, you can't expect 20-year-olds to suddenly become celibate indefinitely. How convenient for you. We can't expect that, but it seems we can discard the vows we've made to each other. It's a big problem only if you make it so. It doesn't mean that I think less about you. But you didn't think that I could think less about you, my future unfaithful wife? Of course I've thought about it, but I know that you understand my reasoning and are strong enough to handle the situation. What happens if Adam demands to take over? You won't be able to fight everyone. We need a way to calm them down. Margaret had a quiet conversation with Kelly and Mary, asking about the consequences depending on how the vote goes. In particular, whether they would agree to make a group decision on an issue that they, as individuals, had every right to reject. This was not a decision she wanted to impose on her wives. A few days later, Margaret appeared in front of the group. As I have already explained, we cannot afford injuries. Even minor cuts and bruises can get infected and become fatal. We have no effective medicines and nothing that would help Zach recover. I talked to all of you young guys. You admitted that you are upset and angry, not knowing how long we will stay here. We cannot ask you not to be attracted to the opposite sex, and you do not have the opportunity to do what is natural now. We have to accept that this is a different emergency situation. In this environment, the usual expectations and boundaries no longer apply. We have a different type of community, where, as we agreed, everything is in common, and we take care of all of us as a group. These were all the same arguments that Helen had given earlier. Tom wondered if they had come together to agree on their script. I am happy to offer myself, but I understand that at 57 I can be unattractive to young men. I think I would have made the same offer if I were younger and in your place. You know, I was quite attractive at the time. She added a final comment, trying to bring some humor to a difficult situation. Greg, one of the young guys, broke into the conversation. I would like to accept this offer. I think you are still very attractive, and I really appreciate that you are willing to do this. It would be an honor for me. Margaret smiled. Thank you, I agree. And if and when Zach gets well, I'll take care of him too. There were an equal number of wives and unmarried men. The mathematics and conclusions were obvious, one at a time. Mary tried to suppress the feeling of panic. Now everything was becoming very real. She said she would support the group's decision, as would Kelly. I order every wife to take a lover. This is my decision as a leader. Don't blame or try to change anyone's mind. We all have to accept this for the good of the group as a whole. This is absolute nonsense, Bill growled. You can't vote for someone to do this or vote for us to just accept it. All the wives have agreed to accept the results of the vote, Bill. Margaret tried to say it kindly, but it didn't help, judging by the devastated look Bill was staring at Mary. Margaret continued. Each wife will draw a straw. The longest straw will choose the lover first. After that, wives will be obliged to take care of their needs in the same way as their husbands. There should be no relationship outside of these agreements. Lovers should treat both wives and husbands with absolute respect, realizing that this can cause severe stress and difficulties. Nothing will happen for a few days until we get used to this idea, and we will keep everything under control. Tom ran away, followed quickly by Bill. Helen and Mary ran after them, trying to convince them that everything was for the best and that everything would work out. The next day, Mary caught Helen looking at young guys. Do you decide which one of them you like? Life on the island seemed mundane to Helen, and she had to admit that she liked looking at young guys. They are all in such good physical shape, with developed muscles and tone. The idea of taking care of some of their needs was very attractive. Have you seen Adam? Is he so fit? Mary smiled. Yes, it's hard not to notice, but Steve began to walk around with a boner, not paying attention to others. We need fit young guys to survive. Oh, I do not know. In fact, it's your Tom who works more. Only he can hunt and fish with success. Young guys just pose better. So what do you think about it? Did you vote against the agreements? I think I don't mind, but this is not what I would have thought about before the accident. But I'm worried about Bill. He doesn't talk much. I think he can handle it, if I pay attention to him. Helen wasn't paying much attention as she watched Adam approach. Her mind was busy comparing him to Brad Pitt in the movie Troy. Hi, Helen. I just wanted to ask if this is going to happen. Do you already know who you would choose? Not really. I assumed that you would all want Kelly to choose you. She is 23, and she is beautiful after all. Oh, I do not know about this. You and Mary are very attractive, mature women. I am sure that any of us will be happy if you want to take care of us. I hope you'll consider me as an option. Indeed, I am shocked. Why me? Well, basically, I like you as a person. We get along well, and this can be a long-term thing, but physically you're hot. But I don't think she looks like Kelly. Yes, but I like you better. Your figure. Slim, like an hourglass, and Kelly is more direct. I like your curves. It's a real feminine figure. To put it bluntly, I would say that you have massive breasts, and I can't take my eyes off them. Your ass is in great shape too. One thing is for sure. You excite me every day, and I would love to take you. Adam laughed to himself and added, I like your eyes and face. The next day, Adam was completely naked by the stream and washing when he saw Helen approaching. She was about to turn away when he got up and started washing his organ. Helen stood as if mesmerized. Adam smiled, giving her a clear view of his rapidly expanding and impressive organ. Finally, Helen looked away and disappeared. At the same time, Mary was talking to Dan. Can I just say that if this happens, I hope that you will consider my candidacy? Mary was puzzled. I'm much older than you. How old are you, 25? 23. But I like you. I really like you. You're funny, it's easy to communicate with you, and you're so caring. You and Margaret are the glue that holds us all together. Oh, right. I didn't know you thought that of me. There's something else. You're a confident, experienced woman, and I think you could guide me. God, I'm not a surrogate therapist or a teacher. Are you sure? Mary laughed. Oh, you impudent. Mary thought about it afterwards. After all, she was an experienced married woman, and Dan was so young. Obviously, the guys came up with their own cases and tried to establish emotional ties with married women before the selection began. It was very timely and purposeful, as Margaret announced that the selection would take place the next day, which immediately led to the appearance of time between wives and lovers. Tom sat in the group and waited in horror for this moment. He was sure that the women had thought about their choice in advance in order to avoid any conflict, and as a result, he got the worst possible outcome. 3 wives drew straws. Helen drew the longest one, which gave her the right of first choice. She approached Adam, smiled and led him by the hand into one of the shelters. Adam's expression of joy was the polar opposite of Tom's expression of rage. He thought about rushing after them, but she made a decision, and it was her own free choice. He sat motionless, trying to keep the bile rising in his stomach. Mary was next and chose Dan. She nodded to him, but did not move from her place to go with him. Kelly had to choose Steve. Mary turned to her husband, Bill. Why don't you, Tom, and Mike go upstairs? It'll be easier that way. She waited for them to start packing and then walked over to Dan. Just before leaving the camp, Tom heard the first moans of Helen's passion. He couldn't stand it and rushed forward. When the husbands returned about an hour later, everyone was sitting around the campfire except Helen and Adam. Mary tried to stop Tom as he approached the shelter. Tom, don't. He looked inside and saw Adam between his wife's legs, squeezing her. Her nails dug into his back. Then he heard a muffled conversation. You like this young organ in your body, don't you, Helen? Yes, I like it. How long have you wanted him? A few weeks. What did you think when you saw him by the stream? That he is impressive. Big. Whose body is this now? Yours, all yours, lover. Tom turned around, picked up his backpack, and left the camp. The rest of the camp looked at each other awkwardly, but realized that it was better not to try to stop him. Helen and Adam eventually left the shelter and returned to the campfire. Noticing Tom's absence, Helen looked at Mary. They came back about 30 minutes ago. You were still there. Busy. He looked into the shelter and ran away. Helen started to panic. 30 minutes ago? Heck! What's the matter? Mary asked anxiously. I said some things. If he heard them, it wouldn't be good. Adam intervened, putting his hand on Helen's hip. Don't worry about it, Helen. He has to accept the new order of things. And if he's not there, it means we'll have more time. Helen ignored Adam, thinking that it was idiotic of her to get carried away and arrange a third time with him, and even more stupid to enter into conversations about it. The first time was frantic and fast. The second was calmer, but no less exciting. She was amazed when Adam got hard for the third time. He wanted her again, and it seemed that they were making love forever. To be honest, Helen was tired, and talking about love was meant to make him relax. Mary was talking to Bill, trying to calm him down. How are you doing? With all this? Bill shrugged his shoulders. Actually, it's pretty shitty. I'm sorry, I never thought it would be so difficult. Dan was fine if it helps. Respectful and attentive. He knows how hard it is for you. We didn't make love, I just offered him a little release. Bill looked at her blankly. We kissed and I did his handiwork. We thought it would be easier to wait until you went hunting. I guess at least you're not as obviously impatient as Helen. Maybe it's easier to just announce that we are no longer married and not together. What? No, don't ever say that. I love you more than anything in the world. Nothing will change that. It's just going to help us survive. If the band breaks up, we'll become like those skeletons turning on each other. Don't be so sure that your decisions won't lead to this, Mary. This accumulated anger works both ways. Tom didn't come back that night. Despite what the young guys thought, Tom was more competent than any of them, but his current mental state could be guessed. Despite her anxiety, Helen allowed Adam to go to bed with her again that night. He really had a great organ, and his toned body was simply irresistible. Mary spent the night with her husband Bill and tried to warn her friend to focus on her husband. When Tom did not return the next morning, they decided to send search parties. Tom hunted for 2 days and for the first time did not return to the camp with the results, but enjoyed the sweet taste of a wild pig alone. He heard the search parties and easily bypassed them, returning to the main camp. Unfortunately, Helen was waiting for him there alone. When she saw him, she lowered her eyes. He ignored her and sat down by the fire. She asked if they could talk. Tom thought that sooner or later it would have to happen. I'm sorry about what I did to Adam. It was more sharply than I wanted. What a sincere apology. Tom grinned. Then we got carried away. I didn't want you to see or hear this. No, I think you wanted to save your married body for your big young organ, which you have been seeking for several weeks and which now owns you. Helen closed her eyes, hearing the echo of her own words. Come on, Tom. Grow up. You know that this is all talk, part of increasing someone's desire and arousal. It's all nonsense, and his ego needs to be fueled. You know what, Helen? I don't believe a word you say anymore. Look at me, Tom. I'm over 40 now. In the real world, I wouldn't have had that chance. But what if it was Jennifer Lawrence or Scarlett Johansson dumped here and they needed a sexual release? Would you really say no or satisfy them secretly, which would be even worse? Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do. But let's say you're right, and I couldn't resist. I wouldn't stick it in your face. You barely waited until you had the first choice. Spread your legs for that cute bastard and dumped me. I didn't leave you. But I admit that I got carried away. I'm sorry. Why is he? He's such a jerk. He's an arrogant freak and pretty useless in terms of helping us survive. He can't do a damn thing. Making love to him is not for the sake of survival, but because you wanted to satisfy him. You obviously don't regret doing it. You just regret looking too involved. Well, yes, there's probably something in that. I'm not going to choose the smallest and most unattractive guy to amuse your ego. I like Adam, and you're going to have to accept that and admit that there's a different reality here. So what, there's not even an apology? Do I just have to put up with it? I think then I know where I am. Eventually, the others returned to the camp. Margaret talked to everyone, trying to forestall the inevitable discontent and anger. She thought that if they could get through the next few days, then everything would calm down. She was furious with Adam and Helen. Their actions had jeopardized the whole plan. Now Tom was a problem. He was sitting a little apart from the group, and only Bill seemed to be able to get him to talk. Margaret announced that they needed to agree on some rules to relieve the tension caused by the comfort arrangements. She continued, "Wives have indicated that they make love at home once or twice a week, so they will have enough time to comfort their partners without compromising their husband's usual lifestyle. So we get 2 days, and they get 5. You can get out right away," Bill shouted. "No, we were thinking about a couple of days with each partner and breaks between them for rest." Kelly laughed. "Yes, we may need a few days of rest." None of the guys laughed, but Kelly continued, "Come on, if we're all unhappy about this, what's the point? We should just have fun and not stress about it. In the real world, we wouldn't do that, but it's just a détente, not love or a relationship." "Husbands should not be neglected or embarrassed," Margaret said, looking directly at Helen and Adam. "This is absolutely normal. I have never refused my husband. Tonight will be spent with the husbands to reconnect, and let the lovers try to find some food for a change. We definitely need it. The couples will agree on their own, and if they don't agree on anything, I will be the arbitrator." Tom tried his best to hold back but couldn't resist satisfying Helen. It felt completely different, like sleeping with a stranger. Making love was hard and exciting. It was definitely wildness, not making love. The images of Helen with Adam and her words tormented him. He was at a complete loss, and Helen felt it. "You know I'm yours, don't you? I don't love him." "You've never felt less like mine, Helen. I'm yours forever. Please don't doubt it." "How do you want to organize our time together?" "You just can't wait. Do what you want. I will often go hunting." "Don't be like that. We have to deal with this. You're still my priority." Helen dropped the subject, hoping that Tom would calm down, and wishing that she had followed Mary's example and been more delicate. When she woke up the next day, Tom was gone. She thought he would calm down soon, although the lack of communication with her husband the previous night had bothered her. Tom stayed away from the camp. Without his food supplies, the others began to starve. Eventually, Bill tracked him down and discovered that Tom had built his own mini-camp. Bill explained the situation. They fished and hunted together. Bill tried to learn more and brought food to the camp. While Bill was tracking Tom, Mary was walking along the beach with Dan. "How's Bill doing?" "I think he's doing fine. I understand that you are not doing this of your own free will, but I want you to like it. We don't have to do anything you don't like." Mary smiled at Dan. "You're just lovely." She turned and kissed him. It was a hot, sultry kiss, exploring each other completely. His reaction was quite obvious, and Mary felt a sudden excitement. Then she led him back to the shelter. If Dan expected to see a timid and shy wife, he was mistaken. Mary unbuttoned her blouse, exposing her large breasts. "I saw you looking at them. Would you like to take a closer look at them?" When Dan stepped forward, Mary pushed her breasts up to his face. Mary decided that if she was doing this, she wasn't going to hold back. She was sexually obsessed. After giving Dan a good look at what he wanted, she pushed him away and knelt down, immediately pulling off his shorts and exposing an impressive organ that was already hard. Wasting no time, she began to take it vigorously. Dan was already trying his best not to stop. Mary noticed this and pulled away from his organ to say, "Don't worry if you need to stop, I know it's been a long time." Dan couldn't stand it and stopped. Mary swallowed it all. She didn't usually do that for Bill, but she was so excited that it seemed natural. She really liked doing it for the handsome young man standing in front of her. Dan began to apologize for the premature ending. "No need, honey. We have the whole day ahead of us." Dan's head was between her legs in the blink of an eye, greedily caressing her. Mary thought he was enthusiastic, although not as skilled as Bill. As soon as this thought flashed, Dan's tongue aimed. The sensations immediately changed. She clung to his head and screamed. Her orgasm came quickly. Jesus, Dan, yes. As soon as the wave washed over her body, she felt desire. "I need your organ in me, Dan, take me." And they made passionate love. After that, every time Bill went hunting, Mary and Dan spent time together, making love like rabbits. Tom turned to Bill. "How do you deal with it, seeing Mary with another guy?" Bill shrugged his shoulders. "I just try not to pay attention to it. It's easier to cope if you just forget about what might be going on between them. And I don't seem to be able to handle it at all. Mary is easier than Helen. At least she seems restrained and constantly checks on how I'm doing, and our time together seems to be the same." Tom's time apart from the group allowed him to explore the island. He made a difficult climb to the highest point, and was able to make out another distant island, as well as a spot on the horizon that could just be another island. This made him wonder if their island was part of the archipelago chain. While checking another bay for a potential place for fish traps, he saw this. An old hollowed-out canoe made of a tree trunk washed up to the tide line. He pulled it out and examined it. It was almost intact, but it was sitting low in the water. Over the next few days, he managed to fix it and make a rough paddle. He rowed it to the main camp, thinking it was surprisingly sturdy. The others were surprised to see him and delighted, deciding that the canoe would increase their chances of catching more fish. Tom and Bill set to work to make better oars using oars from an old wreck. After finishing their work, they tried to fish, each time going further away. For greater stability, they added outdoor floats and practiced stowing water, food, and spare oars by attaching them to the canoe with twine made of leaves. Even though Tom returned to the main camp, he continued to ignore Helen. It has been 3 weeks since the preparations for comfort began. Helen tried to talk to Tom again. "I miss you very much, Tom. Please stay with me at the camp. I only took Adam for 2 nights, even though you weren't here." "What do you want, a fucking medal?" Others accepted it, why can't you? You know that Kelly, Michael, and Steve feel comfortable as a threesome, constantly sharing a shelter. And Bill has adjusted to Mary looking out for Dan. Can't you find a way? No, I can't. You got your wish. I didn't want this. I'm so lonely without you. Adam is a bit of an asshole, to be honest. Please take me back. I'm sorry. I really liked him and I got carried away. I didn't want to seem so impatient or neglect you. I just wanted to get it over with. Come on, Helen. You were more than passionate, and you were hardly in a hurry to get it over with. Okay. I meant that I wanted to sort everything out and fix it. I still want us to be together. I hate the thought of you being all alone. Please let me keep an eye on you. The whole idea was to avoid any conflict. You got what you wanted and you barely thought about me, treated me like shit. Actually, you can't do that to someone you claim to love. But I love you. I thought you'd be okay. You're stronger than any of us. You know, I think you're right about that at least. Tom explained to Bill and Margaret his idea. He would use a canoe to try to get to the next island, and from there see if there was a second one. If this is an archipelago, then there may be more islands, and he will be able to jump over them, perhaps crossing the sea routes and having a chance to escape. They both thought he was crazy, but he and Bill got to work preparing. News of his plan quickly became public knowledge. Helen came up to Tom as he was loading a barrel of water onto a canoe. Please tell me it's not because of what I did? Tears were streaming down her face. This is suicide, don't go away. I'll stop everything with Adam. I have to try. This place is driving me crazy, and not just me. Tom was surprised at how little he valued Helen's opinion now. Once he would have done anything not to upset her. But not now. Tom asked Bill to stay and look after their wives. I think they have other men who are ready to do it. Maybe, but you and Mary still have something, and this one-person thing has a lower draft. I have a better chance alone. There are enough supplies for longer. Bill couldn't argue with logic, but he also understood that his friend was protecting him. This attempt was almost suicidal. The farewell was emotional. Everyone was there, even Adam, although he kept his distance. He was hugged and wished good luck. Tom was even able to hug a sobbing Helen. Watching Tom slowly disappear, Adam thought it was a win. Either they would be saved, or he would have Helen forever, and he was looking forward to their first night together. That thought was quickly dispelled when he approached her. Fuck off. We might as well have killed him. He's a better man than you'll ever be, and I threw him away. Margaret overheard the comment and thought it was a pretty accurate assessment. She regretted her involvement in the whole sad story, and the loss of her best hunter and breadwinner. Paddling was incredibly difficult, especially with the currents and winds pushing him from the east. He was pleased that he had done so much training and had built up his muscles. At times, he saw several shark fins and quickly pulled out baited hooks. It took Tom 2 days to get to the island he saw from the top of the mountain. He waited out the bad weather, found some fresh water, and tried to use the high ground to determine his destination, and was discouraged. There was absolutely nothing in sight. Perhaps the second island was just a cloud. He could have gone back, the decision was reasonable. He almost had enough supplies, or he could have sailed on. Thinking about the survivors on the old ship helped him make a decision. Swim on. He decided to sail east again, hoping that any archipelago would continue in roughly the same direction, if there are other islands there. After 3 days of rowing, very little sleep and dizziness from dehydration, he spotted another island and landed next to a deep ravine in the jungle in the hope of finding fresh water. The landing was difficult due to the reef surf, but he coped, and to his delight, found a freshwater stream from which he drank greedily. When he woke up next to the stream, he wasn't sure if he had lost consciousness or just fallen asleep. He rested and drank often, ridiculously pleased that he could urinate again. Slightly refreshed, but left with almost no food, he made a decision again. Sail east and hope for the best or return. He didn't think he had enough food to return. He set off again, quickly losing count of the hours and then the days. The food was long gone. The water ran out on the 4th day. The sea was endless. Water everywhere, and not a drop of water to drink. There has never been a more appropriate occasion. He could no longer row from exhaustion and let the canoe drift. In a brief burst of consciousness, he vaguely thought that everything was hopeless, but at least he made a good attempt. Then, on the 5th day, he saw her, the boat, remembered the mirror in his backpack, was able to pull it free and used it to reflect sunlight and try to signal the ship. Not a boat, but a ship. And as he approached, He laughed inwardly. Fuck you, Adam. The mirror worked after all. Tom didn't remember much of what happened next, just some memories of the ship and mentions of others. He was taken off the ship by a military helicopter and taken to the hospital, by which time he was hallucinating and severely dehydrated. Despite this, he described the islands well and where the others are located. The next few weeks passed in a blur: hospitals, treatment, questions from the authorities and insurance companies. Tom had an emotional reunion with Helen and then with the whole group. They repeatedly thanked him for their survival. Margaret informed Tom that just before the rescue, the group had agreed that the comfortable conditions did not need to be mentioned or reported to anyone else. Bill did not forget to get an old ship's log and gave it to Tom as a keepsake and in gratitude for the fact that his old friend saved him. A media circus has erupted around their story. Suddenly, there were requests for all kinds of interviews on television, articles in magazines, and publications in the press. Tom and Bill tried to avoid this. The rest of the group, including their wives, were not so restrained. Ghostwriters were already working on a book and a film adaptation in one of the book publishers, and a whole support team began to give interviews and write TV series about their stay on the island. Tom and Bill began to resent some of the content, and several memoirs claimed credit for what they did not do. Since Tom and Bill provided little information, it was easier for publishers to present Adam as the heroic leader who saved the group. Tom and Bill sat together thinking about their marriages. Bill stated that Mary repeatedly apologized for going to the island with Dan and asked if they could leave everything there, saying that the circumstances were so complicated that it had nothing to do with their normal life together. Bill was trying his best to do just that. No doubt she was trying her best to shield him from her actions, and he hoped that they would return to normal life. Tom nodded, saying that Helen had said about the same thing, but they were still distant from each other. There was an emotional void, and they hardly spoke. Helen tried to reconcile with Tom again, saying that he should be famous as the hero who saved them all, and not sit in the shadows in the background. I'd rather focus on saving our marriage, but you seem more concerned about this whole media circus. We can make a lot of money at this circus, and I want to be proud of my husband, who saved us, and for us to be together as a couple, like everyone else. I didn't do anything to be ashamed of. I don't understand why I'm an outcast. At least I was honest in my desires. Not like Mary. What is Mary? Nothing. Well, she was hardly innocent. She and Margaret started giving gifts to guys long before they agreed on comfort. That's how it all started, and yet she came out of it like a saint. Her marriage remained intact. Tom was shocked and faced a dilemma. Should he tell Bill? Helen could lie or exaggerate to make herself look good. The book's release was approaching. Even Tom couldn't avoid an event that would mark the signing of a filmmaking agreement. The TV special was supposed to include interviews with them all. Tom and Bill were dressed in suits that they could no longer get used to wearing. Their wives, however, looked simply amazing. The weight loss and deep natural tan gained during their stay on the island accentuated the elegant evening dresses. Helen hugged Mary as soon as they saw each other. They immediately talked about the state of their marriages. They saw Adam, Dan, Greg, and Steve at the far end of the room. Zach remained in the long-term rehabilitation unit. God, just look at them. They look like a walking wet dream, all washed and cleaned. You miss Dan. Well, you know, by making love? Mary stopped, looked around before whispering. To be honest, yes, he was young, energetic, and handsome. To be honest, making love was a revelation, and I miss him, but everything is still not smooth with Bill. Helen replied, We are far beyond the limits of delicacy. Tom is just icy. I can't get through to him. Give him time. It's hard for them to come to terms with this. We can no longer claim to be faithful wives, and we didn't really strive. To be honest, Mary, I think we're done, and if that's the case, then I might see if I can give Adam another try. It was Bill who started the subsequent storm after he saw another video clip, where Adam says he provided most of the food for the band. He loudly proclaimed, What nonsense! Everything that Adam just described was done by Tom. The publishers hastened to intervene and tried to hush up this outbreak, saying that there are different memories and that everyone has their own point of view. Bill was escorted out, but Adam was furious at being exposed. By the time Tom calmed Bill down and they returned to the main room, Adam and Dan were talking to Helen and Mary. Tom approached the small group. And what do we have here? Just getting to know your wives again. That's right. Maybe you and I should get to know each other outside? Come on, Tom, don't do that. We know each other. Close, after all. Anyway, we just asked if Helen and Mary were going to a party at the publisher's apartment. I don't think you guys want to come because you made such a small contribution to the writing of the series, despite the fact that it brought us all a lot of money. Tom turned to Helen. Do you want to go? Helen shrugged, saying nothing. Go to a party or go with this asshole? Well, we haven't made love since we got back. Unless, of course, you want to take me back to your bed as your wife. I'll be glad if you do. You're still making the same choice, Helen. There's no excuse for survival this time. Adam intervened. Come on, Tom, this is nothing new. We've made love on the island hundreds of times. And I recall that Helen always enjoyed it. Mary was alarmed. She pulled Bill aside and said softly, Don't mind Helen, she's trying to make Tom jealous so he'll take her back. It's just a party. And you want to go? It's nothing special. It's part of the media's demands, but given your previous outburst, it would be better if you didn't come. He looked at her, hoping she wouldn't go. If Mary hadn't been looking at Dan, she might have noticed Bill's look or realized that he said bye instead of the usual good night. Anyway, she turned around and left with the others. Adam looked back at Tom and grinned as they left. He had every intention of satisfying Helen, and again, Tom couldn't do anything about it. He was pretty sure that Dan would also have another go at Mary. Tom and Bill reluctantly trudged to the bar, amazed, their last hopes for the return of their wives fading fast. They sat in silence for a few minutes, and it seemed like several hours. Well, have we agreed? Bill answered with a long sigh. Yes, we have a deal. The next day, Helen and Mary immediately rushed to an official promotional event, a series of blitz date-style interviews with various members of the press. Mary was still reproaching herself for falling asleep exhausted after talking to Dan. However, she was able to convince Bill that everything was innocent, and the publishers placed them by numbers after a late finish. Helen and Mary's first interview with a national television channel began with a presentation and a few warm-up questions. So, Mary, what is the secret of your survival? Well, I would say that in difficult times we worked together. We took care of each other. That was our guiding principle. Were there any conflict zones, Helen? There must have been some tension when survival was at stake. There were some, but we overcame them and focused on the important things. And how were things after you returned home? To be honest, it was difficult to adapt. I think we're still recovering from what happened to us. There was news in the morning papers that you really cared about some guys more than others. What? What do you mean? Your husbands have just published excerpts from their own memoirs about the island. They say that the women on the island were pretty compliant. What? Tom? He couldn't. Do you know who the father of Kelly's baby is? What? Oh my God, is Kelly pregnant? And how are Adam and Dan doing, Mary? We understand that you were with them last night. At this point, the bedlam began. Mary ran away crying as more and more press gathered to ask questions. The publishers struggled to save the two women. When Bill reluctantly agreed with Tom, he said, I never thought Mary would leave with them again. Thank you for telling me about what she was doing on the island. Margaret also admitted the truth when I cornered her. It gave them the go-ahead. The old ship's log, which Tom kept, described in detail all the events on the island. Upon returning home, he handed it to his friend who worked at the Sunday newspaper. His friend worked with Tom and Bill on drafts of articles and writing a major series. The newspaper couldn't wait to release the article, especially since it completely undermined the official version of a major publisher, but they needed Tom or Bill's confirmation. They were worried that Tom would refuse to participate, but agreed that procrastination would make the story more significant. They could take advantage of the official sales launch advertisement and use it to boost sales with a juicy sensation. Serial publications and inserts could cost a fortune. Tom held back, worried about Mary and Bill, but everything changed. Mary's decision to go to the party crossed out all their destinies. The true story was revealed as soon as possible. The press speculated about what happened, and it became known as Love Island. The wives were put to shame when Helen and Mary read the newspapers. They exclaimed, My God, this is worse than I thought. It makes us look like complete women of easy virtue. Adam, Dan, and Steve fared no better. Having satisfied the wife of the guy who saved your life and appropriated his merits, they were disgraced and ostracized. Finally, Tom and Bill agreed to meet with their wives on the condition that they signed the divorce papers that the lawyers were working on. Why did you do this to us, Tom? What, did you tell the truth? You said you had nothing to be ashamed of and you didn't do anything wrong, so I shared that feeling, just like you announced your little vote on the island. Jesus, Tom, you've ruined us, Mary and me and everyone else. I think I've given you about as much attention as you've given me on this fucking island. I have no sympathy for any of the women or guys who have satisfied you, while at the same time living off our hard work. Bill and Mike were the only ones I was worried about, and they agreed with that. Mike, what does he have to do with all this? It turns out that Kelly planned to run away with Steve if he turns out to be the father of her child. You're all worth each other. I didn't think that we had offended you so much. Rather, you didn't care. Anyway, I have to thank you. For what? You gave me the incentive to hit the road and escape. Otherwise, we'd all be there. Let some of us have more fun than others. Mary broke off, turning to Bill. I was trying to be careful and protect you, Bill. It was about survival. Do we have any chance? No, the fact that you gave the work with your hands was a revelation. Then you did it the same way as Helen, but behind my back. At least she was honest about that, and that night at the reunion showed your true self. Don't bother denying it. Mary lowered her eyes, blushing. I don't like him. No, I believe not, but you couldn't wait for that little bastard to get between your legs again, could you? If you don't love him, it's even worse. It means that you left us for satisfaction. I hope he was worth it. Mary began to sob. Of course he wasn't worth it. I became greedy and stupid. I want us to live together, to do everything that we planned. I'm begging you to bring me back, Bill. I'll do whatever you want. I want the wife I had before that trip, but you can't offer it anymore. She's gone. So now I want you, the cheating wife, to leave me alone forever. This comment caused Mary to cry hysterically. Helen was made of more durable material. She refused to cry, but she couldn't hold her head. Tom finished the meeting. Goodbye, Helen, and please, don't stay in touch. For the survivors, money became a problem. The official book had to be withdrawn because it was so discredited, and all offers were withdrawn. Publishers have also filed damages claims to recover their expenses. Accident insurance payments helped them stay afloat. Tom and Bill had no such problems as their memoirs became bestsellers. They have postponed negotiations on further deals until their divorces are settled. Reputation was another matter. The couple were shunned in their hometown. Mary's conservative family completely disowned her. She moved, but she was harassed by the press at every turn. Helen tried to bluff, answering in the press that she had done nothing wrong. We survived. Without these actions, we would have fought and worked against each other. People should not comment until they find themselves in a life-and-death situation. Her answer actually won her a few supporters. She was notorious and became a popular target for young Lovelaces, although no one would risk the real relationship she craved with her. She just couldn't be trusted. Tom and Bill remained best friends and continued their wanderings. Wealth made life easier, and there were more adventures, because now none of them needed to work. In addition, while traveling, they met women. None of them was in a hurry to settle down, and both were a little shy. But they were full of optimism that this would happen in due time, but for now it was a lot of fun to practice.